So yeah, my name's Rowan. I work at the Organic Research Centre. I'm an economist. I focus a lot on the economics of agroecological organic systems, and I've worked for a long time on agroforestry projects as well, looking at the economics of tree production in the UK. And I've just joined as a facilitator for this Adopt project. And we're really happy to join. Firstly, it's really interesting. It feels like an important next step in the research process. We've spent a long time researching what should be happening, and people on this stage have actually starting to get on and do it, which is fantastic. And I'm joined today by Laurie and Andrew, who are the project manager and also the trial host for the Adopt project. The Adopt project is looking to bring, to select, to procure and bring a nut harvester to the UK and adapt it to UK conditions. We're also joined by David. David's from TR Tame and Sons and has a lot of experience working in nut production and is also an advisor and collaborator on this project. And we're also joined by Tom McVeigh, and you've done a lot of work with nuts on your farm, but also as a Nuffield scholar as well. And from some conversations leading up to this talk, I can tell that if there's a rabbit hole related to this topic and you go down it, I think Tom, you might be in that rabbit hole as well, basically. So really glad to have Tom join us today. The structure of the talk, Tom's going to provide a bit more context as to why it's an important next step for the UK agriculture sector to have nut production. We're going to give an overview of two farms and how they run and what's working there. And then Laurie's going to go into a lot more detail around machine selection and then we'll have a bit of a structured Q&A at the end with myself and Tom, and we'll welcome any questions you have at the end as well. All right, I'll pass over to Tom now to give us a bit more background.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm an arable farmer by trade, and I didn't come to looking at nut production just out of a love of nuts. I came to this from the sort of structural issues that we're facing in UK farming at the moment. You know, cereal prices are inadequate to sustain our businesses without government support. But now the government support is subject to the election cycle, that's too short term to give us the confidence we need to invest in it. And fundamentally, the environmental expectations and challenges for farmers is only increasing. So I remember sort of standing over a crop of wheat thinking, this isn't going very well, though the crop looked really good. I'm thinking, okay, I need to find something which is high value, has a low labour requirement, and will yield in a changing climate. So I started looking basically at all sorts of things: apples, pears, plums, soft fruits, asparagus, borage, like you name it, I can't pronounce it, I looked at it. And then eventually centred on walnuts and hazelnuts for two reasons. One is that they are perennial, so they're less affected by annual weather patterns. And the second, which is critical, is that they're non-perishable. So the entire production system is more or less mechanised, but the marketing of that product is also global, not regional, because the product is not perishable. So if you're looking at, for example, cider apples in Hereford, you can only grow them in Hereford because that's where the processes are, that's where that takes place. As I got further into it, starting to look at the different markets and the specifications became really fascinating. And the fact is that these nuts operate somewhere between what we're familiar with cereal crops, i.e. rudimentary specifications, but also with the potential to earn more similar to top fruits, which are prohibitively expensive because of their establishment costs. So over the last year, I started doing a Nuffield scholarship, looking into this and trying to gather all of that information. And what I think is really interesting, I hope, which is going to be clear that everybody will leave here today with, is that these production systems are very highly mechanised. That is an absolute game changer for the scalability and the profitability of the potential of growing them, but also not to take that in isolation, right? The type of harvester you use will be informed by the way that you design your orchard. The way that you design your orchard will be informed by the varieties that you plant, and the varieties that you plant will be informed by where you're going to sell the product. So we'll hopefully get into a good amount of detail on this element, but just remember that there's many elements to look into before you get any further down the road.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. I'll pass it to Laurie.
Hi everyone. So one of our big objectives for what we're doing at Glastonbury Nut Farm is to de-risk this new industry for the UK and demonstrate if it can actually work at scale with mechanisation. And we want to show that this could be a viable option for low to mid-grade land. And we want to share the knowledge with how we've done everything, and we want to help other farmers to get the grants that are helping us to establish it in the first place as well. And then we want to add value in-house with our own processing line, because this is a chicken and egg industry. There isn't a large market for in-shell nuts, so we're also going to have to demonstrate processing at scale, and hopefully in the future that would allow us to help other farmers to plant nuts and then act as a cooperative and give them a route to market. We're also doing a lot of advocacy work through my sister, who a lot of you might have seen before, and we're hoping to use our brand to make nuts a lot more desirable for high-end consumers, restaurants, so that we can raise more funds for growth, and then eventually address unit cost. And ultimately we want to achieve industry scale, so that we can be more competitive with imports, and we'll probably never achieve what the unit crop price that Turkey and Chile are targeting, but it feels very feasible that we could contribute to food security in the UK with this industry. So Andrew's now going to give us a little bit of history about how we've established our farm.
Yeah, so we bought this farm in 2019, and it's a 13 hectare farm, which it's a hilltop farm overlying some limestone, but it's quite nice topsoil on top. And we talked to various different experts about nut growing. There was not a lot of information about, but we decided that the first thing to plant was windbreaks. So we planted windbreaks all around the farm and subdivided it all up, because hazelnuts are wind pollinated, so they need to have relatively small amount of wind blowing through them when the pollination time. So after that, a year later in 2020-21, we planted 6,500 trees. And this is a layout of the farm here. We started planting in 2020 and marked it all out with GPS, north-south, to give us maximum sunlight hours down the alleys as well. Went for a 6 by 2 meter grid, so which was quite excessive planting, but we started with the policy that the more trees you can get in, the better, and then it's much easier to thin out than it is to gap up, and that way you've got trees all at the same stages. Later on in the process, we realised that this was way too tight, so we've actually now thinned these trees out and transplanted them to another site. Next one. So, having finished, I'm slightly greedy, I must admit. So, having finished planting that site, we realised that 12 hectares of nuts was probably never going to cut it. But unfortunately, we live in quite an affluent area, so land is very, very expensive, 15,000, 20,000 pounds an acre. So we couldn't really afford to expand into that kind of that sort of land. It seemed too much to expect with a very long-term enterprise like nuts. So we actually found some land that was for sale down on Sunset Levels, which is class 4, wet lying, quite anaerobic, quite acid, very exposed, not a great soil type for much other than grazing. And probably ill-advisedly, we decided to buy some at auction. And we've spent the last 3 years now establishing a nut grove or a nut plantation on this ground. So it now comes to the 77 acres we bought down there. We've managed to plant up 50 acres of it so far. A big policy that we've established is that you have to get oxygen into the soil. The soil lies anaerobic, and so what we've done is it's a ridge and furrow soil. So every 10 meters there's a little groove in the soil which has largely been eroded, and so they weren't as effective as they needed to be. So we converted a little machine to lower the water table by grooving out these they're called gripes a little bit deeper than they were, and then throwing the soil back up. So we kind of exaggerated what was the system that was there. So we've now ended up with soil which is way above the water table, and some basically small ditches that run every 10 meters across the land, and we've planted into spaces in between on the high ground. So this was, I don't know if you can see that. You can see that it's quite wet. You can see the land that lies wet in between the high ground. So we prepared all the ground and then planted cover crops into it to try and get some diversity. And the soil that we tested when we first bought it lacked much diversity, and it was quite monosyllabic in terms of soil health and soil life. So we've been trying to catch crop it. We've raised the pH slightly by putting some lime on, and by taking the water away from the land a bit more efficiently, I think we've allowed more creatures and critters to survive in that soil. The system that we adopted, because we had this excessive amount of trees on our first farm, so we developed a tree extraction or tree transplanting spade on our little mini digger, which slightly offsets so that the branch doesn't get, the main stem doesn't get hit by the boom of the machine. And we dig out these trees out with like a 600-meter bowl, and then shake most of the dirt off, give them a bash, put them in a trailer, and then we take them down to the levels, which is 5 miles away, and then give them a good shake, and then transplant them into an augured out bowl, which we auger out with another, again, 600-millimeter bowl, and then transplant the trees into that. That works relatively well. We've had relatively good establishment system that we've established and planted. So the gist of it is, it's way too many trees to harvest by hand. So this is where Laurie and I have been working for the last 2 years, looking at how on earth we're going to get these nuts harvested.
Now, Tom, you can tell us a bit about your data. Yeah.
I've got a brother, Tom, who should be here, but it's my turn. We've been harvesting walnuts for probably 15 years at home through seedling trees, which my father planted in the 1980s. A mixed farm, sheep and arable. We're now all grass fields, and we've been putting in walnut trees, sort of 100 a year. For the last 14 years, well, we're at about 900 trees now. On ridge and furrow, permanent pasture, and some odd arable fields. Everything's irrigated. Walnut trees are quite tricky. They want water, but not too much. And they like it dry, but not too dry. So these last few years have been quite a struggle to get the water when they need it. We were watering in February last year, I think it was. And we still harvest by hand. Majority of the walnuts are done by hand with nut brooms, which a lot of you might have seen these nut brooms. It's a wire ball on a stick, basically, and you push it up and down and collect them. They pop in and you empty them into a bucket. The one problem we've got, I suppose, I've taken on walnut plantations in Kent and Dorset, and because it's such a long way to drive, we haven't invested in bigger harvesting machinery, because as you'll hear later, you can't buy machinery that's adapted to our climate. Most of it works in dry conditions, and it's a massive investment. And then we've got to cart it 130 miles to Kent, 130 miles to Dorset. The plantations down there aren't always managed, so we're shaking with quite a simple tree shake on a wire to the back of a tractor, and shaking the nuts onto tarpaulins at some plots, loading it all into the trailer and bringing it home. So 50% is rubbish typically. Another place is mowed perfectly clean underneath, and we can nut broom. There's a team of 5 of us. You still only do probably 50 trees a day. So there is a massive need for some mechanisation to come into this industry. So that's basically where we're at so far, I think. Okay, on the picture on the left there is like a lot of small walnut producers are things that I've come in contact with. A lot of people start washing with a hose pipe. You've got to get the walnuts up quickly. A cob nut will put up with lying on the floor, I think, for can be quite a while. A walnut, because it's got a split shell, I think, they will rapidly deteriorate. So you've got to shake the tree or go out every day, collect the nuts, bring them back, wash them and dry them straight away. So the picture on the left is a walnut washer, quite a big one, sits in the back of a tractor, simple to use. A hose pipe goes on the top and you chuck wheelbarrow loads in there and they come out. We've now upgraded to a French machine we can now do 2 ton in 2 hours. That was taking probably 20 hours to do 2 ton in there. So we've upgraded to that. Still haven't got the harvester. And then, so they want picking up quickly, washing quickly, and then drying quickly. So the next shot along is a commercial dryer and A and B Rousset, the middle one. They go up a conveyor belt, sit on wire racks, and then we're blowing propane. Well, on a still day, to save costs, we're blowing ambient temperature. Or we've got 4 propane bottles hooked up. Gets quite expensive, so we're blowing that through to dry them. Within 2 or 3 days, they're quite stable. And then you can dry them with ambient temperature. And then the last shot along, there's a cracking line. I don't know if it's obvious what it is, but the walnuts that go in one end get cracked and some of the shell gets blown away. It's another A and B Rousset machine. Up a conveyor belt into a magic silver box which separates the kernel from the shell, and they come out a conveyor belt. And some varieties are better than shelling than others. Some varieties you won't attempt to put through there. And then we can do up to 70 kilograms an hour on that shelling line. So the other very important thing for us when we started is, when I was first playing with this, is producing walnut oil. Because you'll find a lot of walnut kernels aren't pale. You really want a pale kernel when you're selling them anywhere. And once they start deteriorating or you have a bad harvest, they'll start to darken up and they just don't look so appetizing. Nothing's wrong with them, but the benefit of having the walnut oil, you see the bottle of walnut oil, they were doing cold pressed walnut oil. Anything that doesn't have a pale kernel will probably end up as walnut oil. And that's really the only way you can make a healthy profit. The way we're doing it at the moment is to sell the walnut oil, which we're retailing at 60 to 70 pounds a litre. And majority of that goes from the farm door, and then occasionally we have fancy chefs that want it down in London, wherever else. I think that's all me for now, isn't it?
Thank you. So Andrew and I have done several research trips down to Italy, France and Spain, and we always come back a bit overwhelmed by the amount of information, but also really inspired because this can work in the UK and these look like really cool businesses. But the UK needs innovation to enter into this nut industry. We can't just copy what's being done elsewhere, and doing that would miss the massive opportunity that we have in starting from a blank canvas. If we take the best elements of the different nut systems from around the world, we can build something really amazing here in the UK. Okay, so on to the challenge of harvesting our 11,000 trees. So back in 2023, we got our first Innovate UK project, and this was a small feasibility study into sweeping nuts off the ground. At the time, we'd only seen the Italian harvesting machinery, and they largely advocated sweeping nuts off bare soil for harvesting. We knew we didn't want to have bare soil, so we wanted to test if we could sweep nuts off the grass. And we used the little organic tools apple harvester as a proof of concept. And we found that you could get 85% collection in a single pass was possible with 50 millimetres of grass. But the primary factor in losses was little cracks and undulations in the ground. So it's really important you've got extremely flat ground. And at this stage, we still wanted to investigate stopping the nuts from reaching the ground. So fast forward to 2025, and we applied for a new Adopt grant to do a nut harvester trial here in the UK. But first we needed to identify the most appropriate machine. And these are the manufacturers that we looked at. And we visited all of them apart from Turkey. And at the time, we were 95% sure that we'd end up shaking the trees because we were worried about a wet harvest period in Somerset. So Andrew and I went to Poland to see their cherry harvesting machinery, and Jagoda makes some really nice kit, and the quality was very good. We visited some customers who were really stoked with their machines, but what became clear was that they needed a lot of labour to operate. Ideally, you'd have 5 people running that machine on the left-hand side of the G004, and it still only does 1 tree per minute at best. So you'd be lucky if you did 400 trees in a day, which would mean our harvesting was 23 days with 5 people, and that's just not viable. Here's a little video of it in operation. Yeah. So the tarps deploy outside, kind of straddling the tree, and then the operator swings this arm in, clamps onto the trunk, and then gives it a shake, and then those tarps hydraulically come back in and drop all of the produce onto a long conveyor that runs the full length of the machine and lifts it up a hopper into the back. So we also visited a company called Warwickshire, who make machinery that's very similar to Jagoda, but it's higher spec, and it is about double the price. And they still take 60 seconds per tree. And if you look at that bottom picture, the full train is about 15 metres long. So turning that around on a tight English headland is just not going to work. There's a video. This is their automatic mechanism. Normally there'd be canvases attached to those arms. So you've eliminated 2 people, but really you still need 3 people to run that system. Yeah, so we really wanted to find a machine that would make use of kit that most UK farmers already have. Solano and Arcusin make these umbrella harvesters for either rear 3-point linkage or tractor front loader. And they're made for olive and almond harvesting, so the trees are quite a lot larger and more robust than even a mature hazel. And ideally you want a tractor with a reversible cab so that you can drive it with rear steer. That's the most ergonomic way to do it, because you're concentrating extremely hard on this operation as you drive up to each tree, clamp it, deploy the umbrella, and then shake. And if you make any mistakes during that, you can write your tree off instantly. So it's pretty stressful work. And then, yeah, the tractor loaders have an advantage because you can lift them right up and over the side of a trailer to unload. But this is really heavy and unstable, and fully laden it's about 1.3 tons up on the end of your loader. And then they use that little trapdoor to unload into the trailer. It's about 400 kilos payload. So hopefully you'd only have to do that at the end of each row of trees. If you had to bring your trailers in to unload mid-row, it'd be a nightmare. And they didn't make a harvester for a telehandler, which surprised us. You know, most UK farms have got access to a telehandler, and this seemed like a logical way to go. So that was, yeah, we didn't want to use the tractor system. Okay. So then Andrew visited Sigma down in southern Italy, who make a shaker that will mount onto a telehandler, and we thought that's perfect. We can get a nice cheap UK telehandler, and we can slap a shaker on the front of it. But when Andrew visited, he found out that the only way to fit one to a handler was to send your telehandler to their factory down in Italy. Because they have to take a big hydraulic line from the handler transmission all the way up to the headstock. So it's about €6,000 to have that work done, and yeah, it means that you can't use your UK telehandler. So it's a major job, but we tried to stay positive. Although now we were looking at spending about 100 grand on a pretty much dedicated harvester machine that could still only do 1 tree per minute. And then more conversations came with the Sigma rep, who was a really helpful and supportive guy. And he explained that because the hazels are so much lighter than olives and almonds, a lot of them, when you shake the tree, will fly up and out of the umbrella. So you'll lose loads of your crop straight away. And then the big bombshell, which is kind of obvious in hindsight, but if you shake a hazelnut tree, you'll get all of the ripe and unripe nuts mixed together. And once that nut detaches from the tree, it won't continue to ripen. It will stay starchy, and so you'll cut the head off the end quality of your product. So next slide. So on his way back from Sigma, Andrew went to see Chianchia and Casanelli again, who are probably getting a bit bored of us now after we visited them about 4 times in the last 5 years. And yeah, both of these machines are very similar. The Casanelli is arguably better at dealing with some grass. They both blow nuts from the harvester on the front to a storage box on the back via that 4-inch kind of flexible pipe. And this is bound to block if you put any wet grass through it. They're a bit faster than the shaker machines. You can do about 3 or 4 hectares a day. So that would mean about 13 days to go around all of our 11,000 trees. But if you sweep nuts, you probably need to harvest your ground 2 or 3 times. So then you've got a month in September where you're just praying for it to stay dry. So, here's a video of one of those machines in operation. Yeah, it's quite an oppressive operating atmosphere. And you can see, if you stand up on a hill this time of year in Italy, you can just see these plumes of dust of all the harvesters kind of going around them. So let's Okay, so we were starting to get a bit worried at this point. None of the shakers were going to work, and the only sweepers we could find would almost certainly get clogged up with Somerset grass. But luckily, we spoke to Tom and David Tame, who recommended A and B Rousseau. So Andrew then travelled from Italy to France for a visit. And the first impressions were good. This is a self-propelled machine, so they don't need that transfer pipe from the front of the header to the rear storage tank. And instead they have a full width set of conveyors, like in a combine, but spaced depending on the crop. So grass blockages are much less likely, and if anything happens, you can get to it very easily. And they said it was possible to do 10 hectares in a day. I'll let you know if that's marketing talk. But it was starting to look feasible. So we could get all 11,000 trees harvested 3 times in 15 days. But a modern X16 harvester will cost you £110,000. But luckily, they had a reconditioned 2005 X15 with 1,100 hours on it for 56 grand. So this is an X16 operation. So it's got an integrated sweeper arm that goes right up around the base of each tree. And it's also, with that fan, blowing any nuts that are out of range out into the row, the next side, so that you'll more easily collect those on the next pass. Yeah, and it's clearly able to work with a decent amount of vegetation on the ground. But yeah, so I was still really worried because I hadn't seen proof that this machine was going to work in the wet. If you hit that video. So Eddie the rep sent us these videos of them going out harvesting in standing water, and it's not ideal, but they are able to get a result. So that is well my nerves. Yeah, that's them harvesting apples, also in standing water. So we're now in the process of importing the X15 back to the UK. Hopefully it's going to arrive on Friday. And then we're going to test it on our local plat of 300 walnut trees. We'd originally planned to test it with our hazels, but we pruned them so heavily from the stress they've had in the drought that we probably won't have much of a harvest this year. We'll do some little small scale tests with hazels, and then hopefully we'll test it at David's site as well. And then with the results from the trial, I'll try and extrapolate some of these results so that we can assess how it could work on a larger scale and in the future. And then as part of our adopt project, we'll also be running a demo day with the harvester. So if you're interested to come and actually see it in metal, please get in touch. And this will probably be in kind of late autumn time or after harvest. Yeah, we're now on to the Q&A session.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Laurie, and thanks, Laurie and Andrew, for really, you mentioned it's a sort of chicken and egg sector at the moment, and I think you're just trashing on at the moment, getting on with it, basically. So I was going to come back to Tom, who's been doing a lot of work focusing on the UK nut sector as a whole, and I was just wondering, off the back of this talk and off the back of your studies and your travels, how important is getting this mechanisation right for the UK? What will it potentially unlock?
Well, the short answer is it's obviously really important. There isn't really going to be an industry if you're not doing that. But just to kind of frame this for you guys a little bit, my study was on walnuts and hazelnuts as commodity crops in the UK. So we've been looking at businesses selling into high value sectors, but my interest was looking at the commodity side of this. So in the world, there's about 1 million tonnes of hazelnuts produced, 70% in Turkey, the remainder split between Oregon, Chile and Italy. Last year, Turkey produced 40% less hazelnuts than they did the year before. So the world produced 40% less hazelnuts than it did the year before. In Italy, they are struggling with water usage. I'd say the overall yields are down about 25%. I went to go and see some farmers in Spain, and the tree needs about 1,000 chill hours over the winter to break dormancy and produce a crop the following year. In Spain, they haven't had the minimum number of chill hours for the last 6 years in a row. So their average across the 10,000 hectares has gone from 2.2 tonnes to 0.8 tonnes, with a break even of about 1.5. So why is it important? It's because you have an inelastic market whereby 30% of the market is bought by Ferrero, and that's going into like Nutella, Kinder, Ferrero Rocher. They can't substitute that. They have to have that hazelnut in that product. They're struggling to get it from these areas. And so there is an opportunity, not just in the UK, but if anybody was at Pierre's talk, I've been to see hazelnut farms from Denmark, Holland, down to Belgium. This is something that is happening in various different places. So there is a push factor that's saying the climate is becoming less viable in certain areas, and we have a very good climate for doing that. But again, in order to do that right, as Laurie alluded to, it requires basically a lot of cooperation between different farmers. For the commodity element, and I can only speak on that, we need to have a standardized production, and we have to have a centralized processing, because generally speaking, the best money you can make is just selling the nut as it is. So we have also got an adopt funding to do hazelnut trials, looking at high value trials, and we've also started a British Hazelnut Association with the view to specifically standardize production systems, centralize marketing, so that you can have a bite of that large pie. Because whilst we should obviously be looking for the premium end of the market, it's very difficult to quantify, and I wouldn't recommend you build a business around it just because of that.
Thanks, Tom. That's great. Have we got a roaming mic available?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So happy to open up questions to the crowd. Steve?
Absolutely fantastic work. Congratulations. Very timely. So I just wanted to see if anybody got any ideas about a couple of possibly missed opportunities. The first one is having more than one crop within the row, given the sophisticated harvesters we get now. In Portugal, we're working on combining nuts with blueberry in a row and using the blueberry harvester. And the second is the agroforestry opportunity, having them wider row alley widths. I mean, the Tame brothers are doing great work with the silver pastoral system. And with land prices on good land, you're looking at £1,000 hectare gross margin. You could use biodiversity crops and get the subsidy. So in terms of resilience and economic return, if you were doing it again, would you try and do agroforestry?
I'll pass on to you.
That's a great question, thank you. I think from our experimentation, trees really love trees. They need to be planted close together and get as many species as you possibly can. We're working on which particular trees have synergistic beneficial effects on our hazels. We have had eucalypts in there, but they've competed and we've actually hacked them all down in the last couple of weeks. But I think we're looking at Italian alders to trap some nitrogen, the leguminous trees, and hopefully they'll do something. We've got half of our windbreaks are in Italian alders as well, and wherever you've got them growing near other trees, they seem to be beneficial. The other thing that we've looked into, we're potentially developing a food bar that we want to sell with our hazels and our oats. We grow oats as our alley crop at the moment. And we're growing blackcurrants in between the hazels, the shrubs, and because we've gone to now a 6x4 system, we can actually run, we can bisect the normal alley and travel across the footpath effectively. So that might work. We don't know yet, but blackcurrants strike me as one of the most flavoursome and very tasty.
With walnuts, I think we're always stuck with, because they're on permanent pasture, if we planted trees in amongst them, we're always struggling with livestock because sheep will just attack any tree they can reach the foliage, and they're always rubbing themselves on the guards and the stakes. And we have missed out on a couple of woodland management grants because the trees aren't planted close enough together. So from the sheep and perhaps cattle perspective, I think it's very difficult to integrate other woodland into it.
I think this is something you have to be very, very careful with, because essentially the more that you dilute your trees in the field, the higher the fixed costs are. So I've got a 30-acre agroforestry field with trees every 30 metres, every 24 metres. I can't fence the field to protect against the deer because it's too much fencing for too little trees. I can't put irrigation in because it's too much irrigation for too few trees. I can't even go and manage the trees properly because you're walking up so much of a field for so few trees. The same is you should be aware of if you're looking at growing multiple trees in a row. Like if you've got a market to sell that to, then great. But if you have to be aware that if you've got, let's say, an apple, a pear, and a plum in one row, you have to walk up and down 3 rows to get 1 row's worth of crop. So if you're then selling it at a farmer's market where the next guy is just doing that once, you'll be at a price disadvantage. It's completely different if you have the market, and in many ways, I think what Steve's getting at is that is a marketing point. For a lot of people, you will sell your product off the basis that you've done it in that way, but you again, I could just bang all the way home, think massively about where you're going to sell the product before you design the system, because you can't do it afterwards.
Thanks, Tom. We've got a question, gentleman over there.
Yeah, presumably can these sweeper things be shared with apple growers, or is it exactly the same window? And also, can you briefly talk about predators?
Yeah, we could share with apples. The only difference really is that our elevator, our conveyor that takes the nuts from the back to the front, from the front of the machine to the back of the machine, is actually only 15 mil in between. And so with apples, you wouldn't get any cleaning coming through because the apples would just travel straight over. You can change that over for a larger conveyor, so you could be more appropriate for apples, but you'd probably get more bruising. So I don't know if the effect would be that great. I have seen them use this same harvester with apples, and it's pretty effective. In terms of predators, yeah, we've suffered with deer we will be suffering with grey squirrels, but deer have been the most present of our problems. We've put a 4-strand electric fence round. I really don't like having permanent fencing around my fields. It's ugly and expensive. But we've put 4 strands of electric rounds. We've guarded all the walnuts that we've planted in between, and we've kept the deer at bay with a little bit of a lead as well. So that's helped. But they are the most prevalent problem, I would say, for establishing trees in the UK at the moment. There's just too many of them. We need to make meat-eating deer very much more sexy than it is at the moment.
Thanks, Andrew. Do we have any more questions? Got a question at the front here. Next question.
Thank you, that was really interesting. We've got a member in the Kenton Government Association who's been using a FACMA, and he's got quite a lot of equipment already, and there's a lot to prepare the orchard beforehand. So have you thought about that, what your next steps are? Does your machine take away sticks and stones and those sorts of things?
I think soil preparation and ground preparation before sweeping off the ground is the absolute key to this whole operation, if we're going to get it right. So we struggle with having too much organic matter on the surface, too much mulch, too much retained mulch materials, which we use a lot of mulch to keep the trees growing faster. What we're looking at is hopefully growing annual crops in between the hazels, and then harvesting them in August, or July or August, and then concentrating on getting them being the ground being as flat as is absolutely possible with a flail mower and sweeping the trimmings away from where we're going to be sweeping up the nuts. Long term, I'd very much prefer to be grazing. I think that's going to use a lot less diesel, a lot more environmentally correct. But at the moment, yeah, there's a lot of light in between the trees, so we're trying to harness that and turn that into some kind of crop. Long term, the hazels will be hopefully meeting over the road. They should actually cut out most of the light, so it'll be a simple case of making sure that the grass or the ground underneath is really flat to accommodate the sweeping, but also getting the grass down to a level where the nuts won't get lost. Yeah, it's key. It's absolutely key.
Referring to the FACMA machine, we have seen that system down in Italy. It does a really good job of cleaning the nuts right up, so your end result is like a fully polished shell, whereas I think there could still be some husks out the back of the X15. But that filtration process, like you say, needs far finer ground preparation, so I would hope that this machine will mean we can do our cleaning. We won't get as many blockages in the field. It's a coarser filtration, and then more cleaning will be done back in the yard.
Brilliant. Any more questions? Gentleman in the orange cap.
It's pink, but just. I think. I appreciate you haven't got the X15 yet. When you do, have you got an idea of what kind of hectareage you could harvest with one? I'm thinking of the idea of if you're kind of building a cooperative of multiple nut growers, at what point do you need multiple harvesting machines? That's kind of where my mind's at.
I mean,
There's a guy who just planted 400 hectares in Western Brittany, and he's actually bought one of these X15s or X19, I think, but apparently he's put a provisional option on 6 of them. So that gives you some kind of indication. You do need to, we're intending to harvest these nuts 3 times at least, because we don't want them lying on the ground. We don't want to actually, it's the best way is to go in fast and regularly rather than just waiting for them all to hit the ground first. So like all these things, where do you take this? If every farmer owned their own combine, it's the same old bash, isn't it? Everybody wants it at the same time. I'm not quite sure what the answer is there, but obviously we want to set this up as an enterprise which will share and accommodate smaller growers and allow more people to get into this game. But it's an expensive machine, and operating time is crucial.
The X19 that he's talking about, they say that it becomes economic at about 75 hectares. But this is like how long's a piece of string, so you can get different machines of different sizes, but the cheapest thing to do is have the greatest capacity spread over the largest amount of acres, and that's the X19.
Thank you. Another question at the front.
I just wanted to come back to Tom on a couple of points. Firstly, after making mistakes in agroforestry for 60 years, the most important thing is the law of final yield. So we all try and start with too greater density of trees, thinking, well, that works for precocity because you're going to get a good crop early on. But when you look at the overall economics, if you have fewer trees, you end up with the same yield. They'll produce the same overall yield, so it's not directly proportional. So think very carefully about tree space. In relation to fixed costs, when we do agroforestry design, we used to think of three issues. One was agronomics, the second was economics, and the third was ergonomics, to do a correct design. In reflection, we're missing one thing. The most important thing is governance. So this is where we look, before we get started, we think of a partnership. No, nobody should be doing agroforestry on their own. If it's timber, nuts, whatever it is, do not think that with my 60 years, I know that I'm incompetent and I can't do things on my own. Actually, you should always start with someone that's got the market and the expertise that can share the fixed cost. So the work we're doing in Portugal is with Marks and Spencer. So it's really good if your partners is the people that are going to buy the stuff. They've got a vested interest in giving good advice and sharing the cost.
Thank you. Has anyone got a response to that?
Yeah, you do end up with, from what I see, you end up with a similar yield, but it's really, for a lot of us, it's like its internal rate of return. Like if you plant a hazelnut, for example, it's 7 years before you get a crop. You don't want to be waiting 15 years to get to that same yield. You want to be getting it in. Yeah, provided you've got the market that you can sell it to at a higher price. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions from the crowd? Or I will use my chair's position, if that's all right. I have a couple. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about next stages for Glastonbury Nut Farm and ideas for future, ideas for sort of routes to market. I know you're interested in a kind of a higher output system that can maybe add to local food security, for example. I was wondering if there's anything you wanted to elaborate on that at all.
So yeah, hopefully next year, we're currently putting in an irrigation system for 10 hectares of the farm, because those 5-year-old trees have been really stunted for 3 of their years, and we've had to prune them back a lot, as I said. So hopefully this time next year, they'll be looking a lot better, and we'll be going into our first kind of commercial scale harvesting, and we'll be able to use the X15 on them. We've already started selling some products through hotbed and shrub. It's been a great part of us to have, and my next project is to try to build our capacity on farm, so we can actually start to, as the Tame brothers do, process, shell, and roast the nuts. So I want to sell like backpacked roasted kernels.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laurie. Tom, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot again. From a sort of a processing and routes to market perspective, with a kind of high output system like Glastonbury Nut Farm, or higher output system, what kind of next steps are needed, and if you could talk us through a little bit more about growing that kind of processing capacity in the UK.
Yeah, so depending on where you're going to sell your nuts, let's assume that you're selling them into a commodity market, which is one of many large processors. They're buying them on price, so they need to take a cracked hazelnut, and whether it costs £1,000 a ton or whether it costs £500 a ton to crack that hazelnut, it's going into the market at the same price. So it's really important that the processing is serving a vast amount of acres, so that cost is as low as possible. That, I think, is the difference to jump between something which can be cottage and maybe work for a few people to actually being a viable option for farmers in general. That's the kind of the final pinch point, which we put that at about 400 hectares. With our trial that we're doing with the British Hazelnut Association, we've got about 25 farms planting hazelnuts this autumn across the country, from Scotland, near Wales, East Anglia, the south. We will do this trial. We will then all sit down and say either everybody plants them or nobody plants them, because you can't hip hop into that scale. You need to be at it from the outset, from the perspective of a commodity market, which just is like the backup, make sure you can sell your product.
Thank you.
Could I just add that?
Oh yes, sorry, Andrew.
So my daughter is probably at the front stage, is probably best positioned to answer this question, because from our perspective, we've looked at marketing and we're not experts in it. So we formed a band or a group of a board of nutters. And this board of nutters is, we had our first meeting last week, and it was very successful. We had a group of people from all sorts of different sectors, from fast-moving consumer goods right through to wholesalers, to retailers, to hoteliers, to restaurateurs, all talking about our market for our potential nuts. And it's a work in progress, but it's interesting for farmers to actually collaborate with people from outside of the sector. Is obviously the route to take. And one other thing we did, it's not really marketing, but we actually made a film, which will be the world premiere is tonight here. And we're quite excited about the distribution of that, and like getting the world of nuts out to people via a very different sort of system of publicity that farmers aren't really used to. Hopefully it'll work. I don't know. We'll see. The jury's out.
And see you all there later, hopefully, at the screening.
The grass tent, I think, at 7 o'clock.